line between application and infrastructure is virtually invisible in these modern apps.
The kind of thing that a global computing fabric with immense resilience and scale can deliver without even breaking a sweat.
That's really what the promise of the cloud's always been.
It's all focused on the business objectives. That's where we craft the plan.
In the tech world, we like to celebrate the lone genius, but I'm just going to tell you right now, they're just the convenient face as founders to focus on.
Welcome to Cloud Talk. Here's your host, Jeff DeVerter.
So I'm joined today by a couple of my coworkers, Josh Prewett and Travis Runty. Both of you I've known for decades. I think becomes the word that we start to use when we do that. So thanks so much for being a part of the program here today.
Glad to be here.
And
thanks for having us.
And really what we want to talk about is now when I got to know each of you when you started here at Rackspace, your jobs were not high and lofty. In fact, Travis, when I met you, I'd come in to help build out this SharePoint thing. And we used this system inside of Rackspace to help keep track of all the things. It was core to our business. And so I was asking some folks, how do I learn about this? And they said, go talk to Travis Runty. That's his job. He directs tickets all around the company inside of here. So go spend some time with Travis. So Travis, what was that first job?
Yeah. So that was me, wanting to become a Linux engineer, but not quite being strong enough at Linux to be a Linux engineer. And so I took a role at Rackspace. It was called the support specialist. And basically it was answering phones, kind of triaging customers' concerns and directing them to the right technical resource that can get them the help that they needed.
Very cool. And how old were you when you took that job?
Oof. How old was I? 23, 22, 23?
What was your job before you came to Rackspace?
Yeah, so it was before I came to Rackspace, I was a network engineer at a local water utility company. Okay. And, I was deep into the Cisco Windows ecosystem. And we actually converted our call center from Cisco Call Manager to an Asterisk open source or Trixbox solution. And that's when I was introduced to Linux, was in VoIP. And that's when I knew I wanted to do that full time.
You're like, this could be my career. Now, Josh, I introduced you as well. What is your title here today? What is it you do for Rackspace?
Yeah, so I'm our Senior Vice President in Private Cloud and the Chief Product Officer. And
what was your first job at Rackspace?
My first job at Rackspace, I was a website support technician. So that is similar to Travis. It was, hey, we think you might eventually be good at technology, but you're not good enough to be an L1 today. And so that was my job, right? It was, I worked for Cloud Sites when Rackspace had that offering. And I remember in the interview, they said, I asked them, I said, so you're saying that I can work second shift and miss traffic and get paid more money? And they said, yeah, that's the case. So I was second shift working 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. doing, frontline phone calls, chat support, all that good stuff.
Man, all the stuff. And Travis, what's your title here today?
Yeah. So title today is the CTO of our public cloud business.
Yeah, I say today because, this is technology. I mean, anything can happen tomorrow, but for today, we're good. So I think that when we think about Rackspace, and I think this is true of a lot of technology companies, that the word meritocracy really starts to shine, that you can advance in your career based on, in large part, your ability to do what you're told, to deliver, to bring value to the organization. Because obviously there were leaders along the way that saw that what you guys were doing was creating value. You were studying on your own time. You were coming up to speed on the things that we do, and off you went to the races. And so I'm curious to, one of my first questions or thoughts is, do you think that's true of a lot of industries? Well, I guess it's a two-part question. One, when you started at Rackspace, so that would have been back, Travis, I came here in 2008 and you were here before I got here. So that's a while ago. And do you think that it is more or less true of other industries today? So Josh, starting with you, how much do you think this has changed over time and affecting other industries?
Oh man, so I do think that it's maybe slightly more true in technology, because in technology, it's maybe a little bit easier to prove what you are capable of and what you can do. There's also so many other things like certifications that exist out there that maybe aren't like your traditional, 4-year degree path. But the advice that I give to, like, I'll call them young people, which makes me feel real old. The advice I give to the youths is, find a good company that will, that is large, where you have room for growth, and then work your butt off. And I speaking for myself, it's worked out really well for me. Obviously, it's worked out for you, Travis, and you, Jeff, as well. Because I do think that there's a key point in there of find a company of size where you can go and work your butt off, because then you're not capped by, hey, you've got to wait for the person ahead of you to either die or quit, right? Like that's the problem with working in small companies, is you can only go so far before you're log jammed, and you have to wait for that person ahead of you to die or to quit, and then you have nowhere else to go. And I think that's been one of the benefits of being at Rackspace, that when I joined, we were about 2,000 employees. Today, we're about 7,000 employees. And so that's always given the opportunity for there to be something else to go do, something else to go learn.
Well, in your career, you bounced around the company a fair amount. But before you get into that, I want to go over, Travis, how have you seen it? Because you have also been a person, as you've grown in your career, that have had a pretty fair amount of people reporting to you in different phases in the career. So when you think about, what you would look for, or, the behaviors of what you see inside of the tech industry or outside of the tech industry, how do you see that changing?
Yeah. So it's interesting. You mentioned earlier doing what you're told, right? It's not that.
No.
It's looking for where there is value to be created, right? Or where there's a gap, right? And so, when people ask me, what do you recommend? How can I prepare for this? Or how can I get better at this? Assess your environment, right? Assess your current team, and look at what your team is collectively really, really bad at, and figure out how to become good at that. Like, that's been my
That's your
my
MO.
recipe over and over again. Who are we as a team? Where are we not good at? And I love learning new things. And one unique thing about the technology industry is that I can go Google something, I can go YouTube some videos, and I have the right to explore. And if I get it wrong, I'm not going to take down a hospital or something crazy, right? We have space to try things and create and explore.
So give me an example of a time you saw an opportunity, you saw a hole in the team and thought, I can do this.
Oh, that's a good question. I think if I go way back, it comes down to we were deploying a ton of Magento instances.
Yeah.
Right. I was an emerging Linux engineer that had some MySQL skills, and so I could establish a LAMP stack pretty well.
Yeah.
But we were deploying full Magento stacks, which is an e-commerce platform, and it was not going well. And I jumped in. I understood what the nuances, what the best practices were for Magento, and before I knew it, I had most of the Magento customers at Rackspace, and I'd created a sub vertical of expertise that nobody even considered or was a thing until it became a thing.
That's super interesting. And Josh, for you, you're just talking about how, find a company that's got some size that you can move around inside. And your career did take you, or has taken you through a lot of different areas. How have you earned? This could be a hard thing, I think, for some people. You're in the team that you're in. You look over the cubicle row. You look over the dotted lines and realize, I want to work over there. How did you go about establishing a relationship and trust with some of those hiring managers who would say, I'll take a chance on old Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think Travis said it well. So one, Travis's inbox is now going to fill up with people looking for help on their Magento deployment.
That's right.
So this is Travis launching his consultancy business for Magento services. But my story is not that different. It's kind of the see a need, fill a need. You see a problem and you own it and you solve it to completion, and inevitably that takes you across divisional boundaries. It takes you across reporting lines to where you start to gain the attention of other people. And then, that sort of snowballs on itself. Next thing you've got people in different departments that, know your name and know who you are, and they start to lean on you. And then, word kind of gets around. I think that, everybody wants to work with, competent folks. And so once they've found somebody they feel like they can trust, that reputation starts to spread. And so that's kind of what happened with me, is I would, like I said, I'd frontline chats, phone calls, tickets, all that good stuff. And you always want to make sure your customer's taken care of, and you want to see all of those, any incident to completion. So you invariably, you go across, different lines, you start to meet and learn about different people. And then one of the other, I call it keys to my success is doing the job that nobody else wants to do, or the job that everybody else found too hard, right? So my story, like Travis's on Magento, my story would be early on in my career. Like I said, I started on second shift working for our cloud sites. Then I became an L1 Linux administrator, eventually becoming a lead tech on first shift. And I was going to step into management. And my choices were to be a second manager on first shift, where things were largely under control and worked really well, or go be a manager on our second shift team, where we had lots of problems and we'd gone through, manager turnover and things like that. And so in my mind, I thought, oh, well, I'll go to second shift, right? Because worst case scenario, I'm, just yet another person who failed. But best case scenario, I turn it around and, I can make a real impact and a big difference.
Yeah. So a couple of things I want to unpack there, but one of them is, when you work with those other teams, you start to get some attention across the cubicle aisles, across those dotted areas. What I've observed, and I've seen people succeed, and I'm sitting here with seen people fail, and I've seen people succeed, like with you guys here. And where I see them fail is the way I tend to see it happen most is somebody will say, "Hey, that Travis, he gets things done. Well, I've got this special project, this thing we're trying to solve for. Travis may be over here trying to be the world, the god of all things Magento, but then somebody says, 'Hey, Travis, along those lines, could you help solve this thing? I can't pay you any more money, and it's going to take a little more time out of your day, but can you help us out with that thing?'" And here's where I see people fail. They were like, "Well, I can help you with it, but if you want me to do 2 jobs, you can pay me for 2 jobs." I've had people quit when you get into a rough patch and somebody has to step up, or there's an opportunity for someone to grow, and you think, "I'm going to give you that opportunity to grow," and they're like, "How dare you? How dare you?" So what goes through your mind when somebody comes knocking on the door and they say, "Hey, Travis, can you give us a little of your time?"
Yeah. So in a role, what I've always focused on is not my current role, right? It's where those opportunities and where do I want to grow to. And so I love those opportunities. Those are stretch opportunities.
That's right.
Yeah. And so and then Josh kind of referenced this earlier, but on those stretch opportunities, you also have a lot more space for forgiveness of failure. Not that you're planning for failure, right, but you aren't expected to be amazing.
It's a little softer, if it's not your full-time job.
Yeah, so you could be a little bit more bold. You can, you get a little bit more forgiveness, and so those are perfect opportunities. You have this amazing, elevated exposure opportunity with a whole lot of forgiveness to learn it.
Right. Now, here's an interesting question. So sometimes I've seen also there can be leaders who will be a little bit parasitic, and they'll find the people who want to dig in a little bit deeper, and they will exploit them. We don't see it as much around here, but maybe there's been 1 or 2 over the years. Have either of you ever had an experience with somebody like that where you realize, I need to back off a little bit?
For me, yeah, for me, I don't think that I've had that. Nobody's coming to mind for it. One of the pieces that I would add on to what Travis had said is, I think making sure that you understand the value to the business that the thing that you're working on brings. Right.
That's important.
And that's so key, because as long as you understand who's really driving it. Is it just your direct manager? Is it a manager in a different department? Like who's really driving it, and what's the value to the business that it brings? And is it a priority of, that key executive. And if it is, then great, right? But if it's not, then you've got to question like, hey, is this the thing where everybody wants to be spending their time? And it's really easy to figure out, like especially at Rackspace, where our whole executive team is extremely accessible, right? Like you can go and have a conversation with our CEO Amar and say like, hey, is this a priority? Is this what I should be working on? And I think that he'll give really good, clear direction and advice on it. And so for somebody who did find themselves in a position like that, Jeff, where they were worried about like, hey, I feel like, am I being taken advantage of here? Am I doing too much? And like, make sure that it really is part of the strategic direction of whatever company it is that you're working for.
Yeah.
And if it is, then, go attach yourself to it and knock it out of the park and do amazing things.
Love that.
And if it's not, then, find something that is.
So that's a really great point, Josh. And I will say that was a lesson that I learned pretty early on. And I'll tell you, there was a shift in how I approached, we'll say complicated or complex engagements. I like simple, I like low maintenance. And I grew up being told that, just figure it out, right? You don't make a fuss about it, just make it happen, figure it out, right? And while that's a great mentality and it's a great way to get things done, it's a really, really bad way to make sure that your efforts are noticed. And so, if I had a customer base, my goal was to make it the most uneventful customer base possible.
Yeah.
And what I found was, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but some of my competition, right, my teammates with louder, less managed customer bases, we're getting a whole lot more cycles with the leadership, and so they were top of mind. And I was really, really working crazy to keep a really, you'd say, manageable or cooperative customer base.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't getting any visibility, right? I was really knocking it out of the park, but no one knew what I was doing. And so there is a slight, I say slight because it can be overdone very, very, very quickly, but there's a slight element to make sure that you are marketing your efforts and your progress as well. That's a responsibility that people undervalue pretty often.
That's a really good point to bring up, in that there is a need to, like you say, very, very carefully and very cautiously, but to market yourself. Make sure that the right people can have visibility to what's going on. And it brings up really an interesting point that I've talked about a lot over on the live stream, and that is the need and the use of mentors. How has that factored into both of y'all's careers here in thinking about not just how do I go find that next job or start doing it now and get the right attention, but actually start to consult with some folks who are a few clicks ahead inside of the organization, be it formally or informally? How has that worked out? Josh, over to you.
Yeah, I always think that mentoring is such an interesting concept, because like if somebody asked me today, like, hey, who are your mentors? It'd be hard for me to point to somebody, because I've never had that conversation where I go to somebody like you're in middle school and said, hey, will you go out with me? Will you be my mentor? I've never had that conversation, but there's a lot of people that I look to for advice. I mean, look, both of you guys, like we have our text conversations or signal conversations where, we'll just chat back and forth. And there's people that are in, even more like very junior roles where I'll value their opinion. And so I think that mentorship doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be like this, Oracle C-level, grizzled, gray-haired person that is your mentor.
I don't look that
It doesn't have to be that, right? Like a mentor can be anybody who gives you advice that you find valuable, right?
Yeah, it's a great call out.
And so I think that, finding those people, finding your people whose advice you value and advice you trust. And then it doesn't really matter like where they are in their career, what industry they're in, because as you think about problems that you have, you'll have your network of people who, you can bounce the idea off of them. And, whether it's an email draft that you think maybe you want to send to the CEO, or maybe it's, a career advice or something like that, you got your people that you can bounce things off of. And so it's been immensely important to me at Rackspace, right? I've gone through, I've lost count at this point, but I'm going to guess it's probably upwards of 18 to 20 bosses. And some of them have been absolutely amazing and fantastic. Some of them haven't been as great, right? But you can always learn something from everybody.
Oh, you really can. How about you, Travis? How has that factored into your career?
Yeah. So I've had great mentors, most of them unofficial. And it's interesting that everybody needs or expects something different from a mentor, right? I've had folks that are unable to like relay a message that's well intended, but not be received well intended, right? That's a great opportunity to have a sounding board of a person that could hear your message and help you tailor that message, right? I'll tell you personally where I've leveraged mentors in the past is understanding context and perspective.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, and so like I think as an engineer, a young engineer especially, there's a tendency to have your world, right? Your own world where you
Yeah.
make up your own reality and you think that the technology is the center of the world and all this great stuff and really, having some senior leaders that can help you say, well, we're doing this or we're approaching this because of A, B, C.
Yeah. Here's the why.
Here's the why, right? And then you realize, oh man, this is a bigger ecosystem than just me on a console. Or this is why we're making this what I thought was a really stupid decision.
Yeah.
But really, really helping me understand the context or the perspective helps me understand the why, a person's intent, which, if I understand a person's intent and it's just, delivered like poorly delivered or poorly received, I can work
Yeah.
around that if I understand the intent. So there's a lot of value in that.
And that's really been compounded, especially in the past few years, where rarely are even the three of us in the same room, because now everything is happening in the context of Teams chats or text or Signal. To your point, Josh, context is really hard to maintain there, and intent gets super hard to maintain. So. Both of you have risen now at a point inside of the organization where either now or in the past you've had pretty substantial teams. You've been in charge of hiring and firing all through it. So let's talk just for a second about that Josh, you already breached this, but that first leadership role, that first manager role. What were you? Why were you pursuing, Josh, a move from, hey, I'm really great on the console and I can do the thing? Because a lot of people don't successfully, jump the chasm.
Yeah, man. So here's where I make my joke that like those who can do, those who can't manage. And so, like not trying to stir up all the hate from management. So I say that in jest. But I did know that for me, I looked at a lot of folks that would have been principal or distinguished architects and engineers, like within Rackspace at the time. I looked at them and I thought, man, like I'm a good technical person, but I will never be at that level.
Right.
And maybe I was selling myself short, maybe I wasn't, but I did recognize that I had a pretty good knack for business and being that translation layer between technical people and technical requirements and business requirements.
It's so important. Yeah.
And so like, to me, that's why it made sense to go into management and to go into leadership, was that I could be that technical leader and I could multiply myself through others by, sharing with them what made me successful as a technical person, so that they could, themselves then go and be successful as well.
Right. How about you, Travis? What was that first role that you moved over to, where now you're not just the individual contributor, or IC as we call them? Why did you make the jump?
Yeah, I could make probably a really good, interesting story that tells a good reason. But I'll tell you the real path for me joining a leadership team or joining leadership is I was an IC. My boss got promoted, and so they're going to backfill him. And that was no big deal for me, right? I'll get a new boss. And then I found out that a couple of my peers were applying for it. And I was like, I did not want to work for these guys. So they're going to do it. I'm going to do it. And so that's how it went down.
What's a really good story, especially as somebody, you think, oh, you can't even, you can't find your way around a shell, let alone, an HR system to manage my life.
Man, I think so. One, that's a hilarious story, and in the 13 years that I've known Travis, I actually had never heard that one before. So that's one, that's fantastic. But to me, it highlights something that I think is important, and that is that management is a different career path than being a technical person, right? And like obviously for Travis, like this, it worked out well, right? But one of the things that we often see is, hey, you're really, really, really good at doing the thing. Go and manage other people to do the thing, and it doesn't always work out.
It does not
right?
always work out.
Because being a really great technical person doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a really great leader of people.
Right.
And it's as I grew and I started to manage managers, it was one of the things that I would coach them on as they move from that IC role into a management role, is that it's a totally different career path. It is people leadership and people development, and a dash of the thing that you were so great at. But you've got to really, be willing to do the people leadership and people development, and recognize that that is your job, as opposed to, being the person who's really good at the thing.
Yeah, because if you think about it, before your job was to make the system better. Now your job is to make a human better, so that they can make the system better. All right, so let's continue in the trust tree here with Travis. What was the hardest part that he started? So Josh, what was the hardest part of making that shift? Something you didn't expect, or something that was like, oh crap, I messed that up?
Yeah. Okay, I know exactly what it was, because I had a practical meltdown over it. And so, as an engineer, systems do what they're told, right? And it's a very direct sort of thing, right? They'll do the wrong thing if you tell them to do the wrong thing, but they'll do what it's told, right? But you feel like you're making quick impact. You're able to make quick decisions, right? And you just boom, 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 go. When I joined the leadership team, I did not feel effective at all, right? I couldn't come to quick decisions. I didn't feel like I was making the team better. I didn't feel like I was building a followership or buy-in or momentum. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? I can't do anything. Nothing is moving the way it needs to move. I'm not moving it forward. And my leader at the time tells me, you have to influence. It's a much, much, much slower process. You have to influence. You have to operate in spaces of gray, right? And you have to be okay, compromising a little bit more frequently. And for me, that was a really, really, really big piece, because I just felt ineffective for a really long time. And then I learned to embrace that, say, ambiguity.
Nice. How about you, Josh? What was hard for you?
One, I think Travis's answer was great, right?
It really was.
It was described to me, and I've described it to others as, when you're an IC, you oftentimes you get wins every day, right? As an IC, I might answer 80 tickets in a day and solve 80 different customer problems, and I'd have a lot of wins in that day. And then you move into leadership, and your wins are fewer and farther in between, right? You're taking on larger projects that take a long time to get out, and things like that. And so your wins feel like they're further off. My answer, though, is going to be different. My answer is the performance management side, right? And this is something that, I talked about people who go from ICs, people doing the thing, to managing people who do the thing. The struggle that they all have is performance management. And the reason why is because the reason they were promoted to being a manager is because they didn't have any of those problems. And so they've never even been in the room when a performance improvement plan is being delivered. They have no idea how to have that conversation, because they've never been on the receiving end of it. They've never seen it happen. And so, fortunately at Rackspace, we have really great manager onboarding and new manager training to kind of help step through that. We have, really great HR partners that help, people step through that. But that for me was the most difficult thing about going from IC to manager, however long ago that was.
Wow, it's really great examples. It's a really cool point to bring out, Josh, and the fact that you got promoted because you're knocking things out of the park, not because you had great experience in PIPs. Oh, this is how I do that. Oh yeah, just like the last time I got one. No, you never got one. So, Travis, you mentioned when you're giving your example of having to be comfortable in moving in the gray, and I can think and living in the gray, and I can think of no other example of being a leader and having to exist in the gray than hiring new employees. Even sometimes when they're coming from a neighboring department, but especially when they're coming from outside, because you can look at the piece of paper, but at the end of the day, it's worth just about that piece of paper. So talk about, as you've hired people, let's talk about some of the things that you found works well. When do you start to feel that tick in the gut that says, I could make this bet?
Yeah. Yeah. I think bringing the team along with you is a huge piece, right? Because it's a community effort to onboard a new team
Yeah.
member. And if they're not bought in on the potential or the fit of a new team member, that's a really painful process for everybody involved.
Yeah.
And I think there's different approaches. People apply pressure during the interview process to see what cracks for them. I don't love that strategy at times. That's
Yeah.
not very inviting, right? Or recruiting, but I do think there's some value in creating a tense situation during the
Yeah.
interview. And the best way that I find to do that is I go through a resume and I find a specific achievement that they're proud of, and I actually try to understand what their actual role was in that, right? Not just if they
All right.
participated. But I think that it has to be a team effort. I think that you can make the process as exhaustive as possible. You can make the vetting as exhaustive as possible, but reality is you're taking a leap for every external hire that you do.
Yeah.
You really are. And so you'll get it wrong, right? You will get it wrong. If you do enough hires, you're going to get it wrong. And
Yeah.
so I think being
Somebody will
prepared,
get through.
yeah, I think being prepared to have that performance management conversation when you do get it wrong is the hardest part, but it's probably the least commonly done.
But so to double down on that, then you're making a bet, you're making a gamble that your initial findings and feelings and that of the team that this person's going to be a win. How much leash do you give? When you think about that, and isn't that maybe even also the value of the PIP, because you can say, "Whoa, this isn't going so well. Let's just not cut and run, but let's find a way to make you successful."
Yeah. So if I'm ever on the edge, right, I would much rather miss the right hire than make the wrong hire. It's a tremendous drain on every element to coach, to improve, to right size, right fit a
Yeah.
bad. That is an exhaustive process. And so, but from a leash or runway perspective, I would say it depends on where the misfit is, right? Or not misfit, where the lack of fit is.
Yeah.
Is it a personality or a character flaw? I don't think you can't fix that.
Can't
Right?
fix that.
So I think that's a pretty quick one to address. Is it, man, we place this person in the wrong role? Like they're really a racker fit, they're a team fit, but just the way their communication's now, or the way they process things, or their technical background, just not a fit. I think we have a ton of leeway or opportunity to get flexible there historically.
Yeah. So Josh, I think Travis really nailed that one. But let's talk to you for a second about, what are things that stand out when you're going through the process with someone that are either like, solid, love to work with this person, or what are maybe some characteristics of this is not a fit here?
So for me, you can call it culture if you want, right? Like I think cultural fit is the most important thing. A lot of the times I joke that I'll spend more time with y'all than I will my family, and so I really hope I like you. And so I think cultural fit is part of that, and what cultural fit really means is it's your attitude, it's how you show up, it's your willingness to listen and learn. It's do you show humility, or do you claim to be the center of the universe? How often do you defer accomplishments to, hey, really these were accomplishments of the team, as opposed to standing up and banging your chest and saying, no, this was all me. Like it's so I sum it up as culture, but another word for it could be attitude.
Right, attitude. It's a great point. It'll because those are the things, back to Travis, what you were talking about, is that somebody's attitude, and which is a reflection of who they are, is not the kind of thing you can coach out of them. It is just who they are.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, and this probably goes back to one of my earlier points about creating value or looking for opportunities or gaps within a team. I think that there is a tendency for a hiring manager or for a team that's looking for a new teammate to hire folks that look, sound, think the same way that they do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of comfort, I think, in that, right?
It's an easy path.
It's the easy path. It is. I'll tell you, I've got it's a really well-known, element of how I build teams. I love odd people. I just like odd people in general, right? And so that's that natural sort of curiosity and has kind of helped me build some really, really neat teams in the past. Teams that you would not typically think would work well or would do great things together. But I think having a really, really diversified team is super, super key there.
That is super important. Now that takes me to really where I wanted to get, or one of the main things I wanted to talk about, and that is, we've seen in the past probably 3 or 4 years, a lot of very public companies saying we are taking off the requirement for a 4-year degree from the hiring requirements. That must have to. We would really like this person to have it, but they don't actually have to have a 4-year degree. And I wanted to go to this just simply because I think there's a lot of folks who are really wondering, especially in a tech industry, is that something they have to get alongside of getting their the technical certifications that they might need to do the job as well. And in a bit of utter transparency, the way that I've grown up through my career, and by the way, tech is the second career, is there is no 4-year degree hanging on my wall because it just doesn't exist. So I snuck through the cracks. But so how important is that to each of you in your hiring, in fulfilling the roles that you've got on your teams?
I'll start. So, look, like you, Jeff, when I started at Rackspace, I also didn't have a 4-year degree under my belt. And, it's something that it doesn't hurt for somebody to have it, but it's far from a requirement. And I think that in the tech industry, it really is about showing your capability and what you can do. Especially when I think about my time hiring, like individual contributors, right? Your Linux admin 3s, or your Linux engineers, or your virtualization operators, right? Like hiring those folks. It's pretty easy to like have a conversation with them or sit them down at a terminal and say, like, show me what you can do. And then at that point, it really doesn't matter if they
was lit or whatever. Yeah,
that's exactly it. I mean, it's been a while since I've even looked at statistics of this on like my direct teams, and so I truthfully, I do not know what the makeup of my direct team is for has a degree versus doesn't. But I can tell you that when I polled the organization that I was leading about 4 years ago, it was about 150 or so people. It was roughly 50-50. I had about half that had a 4-year degree and about half that didn't. And so, I'd sum it up as it certainly doesn't hurt, but it's also not a requirement.
Right. And it can bring great value provided, there's a direct parallel. I mean, I would want my doctor to have a degree, ideally. So there's
well said. Well said.
Yeah. How about you, Travis?
I'll tell you when hiring, the education section is probably the last section that I look at.
Yeah.
And when I do see it, my response is kind of like, "Oh, that's interesting."
Nice.
That's probably the extent of it, right? But with that said, I think that there's value in depending on the personality or depending on the way that your brain works. And so I know that I'm a very mechanically minded person, and I made Linux my hobby at a point in time, right? And so it was all I did every day, all day. And that's how I learned it. But there are people that required learning in a more structured way, right? Or don't have some of the context that's required to, piece together a virtual mechanical system. And so, I think that supporting structured elements there can be really, really valuable for the right mindset. That can also be really, really, really disengaging and, kind of stunting for the wrong personality or a different type of personality.
Yeah. Very interesting. Because especially in an industry like ours, where maybe, Josh, you mentioned an example of not taking down a hospital, but where a mistake doesn't necessarily mean that somebody dies. It just means that, the system maybe doesn't get built right or whatever. I mean, it's a thing you can recover from. And so what gets more important then is, can you deliver the work product? Can you do the thing? Can you build the Linux environment? Can you chat online with somebody, get it solved for it? And then can you build a following and a reputation for being able to learn things and deliver them and grow inside of the company to be at a vice president level? And clearly that is yes here. Now, I think if you're going and hiring in a new CFO, probably looking for some letters behind their name. And so we're not making blanket statements here. So we are getting close to the end of our time to talk, but I wanted to ask you each of you one more question. I didn't tell you I was going to ask this on purpose, but you've both been at Rackspace for a good long time. Now I'm asking this of people who work at other companies too. This isn't a sales pitch for Rackspace, but why are you bullish? I think we get why you like technology. You're just geeks. So welcome to the club. Glad you're here. Coffee will be served later. But why are you still powering it out here inside of Rackspace? There are those that would say, dude, the heyday was a long time ago. Why are you still there? Why are assuming, since I can still see your faces and I can still see you in the gal, that you're bullish on us? Why is that, Travis?
Yeah. So one, there's a loyalty element, right? And this place helped build me into a professional. And at some point in time, I want to make sure I paid that back. I've paid it back by now. So I'm here now because I think that there's a strong population of technologists that I relate with, I feel accountable to, and we have to be successful. And I think championing all the efforts that they're doing and being part of that and knowing what we're capable of by seeing them in motion, hearing our customers understand the value that we create for them on a daily, hourly basis. It just fills my bucket, right? The possibility, the impact that we do every day, and what got me here originally, and it's kept me here, is let's say this. Most IT shops have the smartest person in the room, right? And they all know who it is, and they're usually a jerk, and they usually don't really do a great job sharing their information, right? Because they want to remain the smartest person in the room. I'll tell you, I don't feel like that person exists at Rackspace. There's a very intentional sharing of knowledge, of cultivating peer growth, right? And for me, that mindset, that culture, it's hard to really train, hard to lead once you're part of it. And I think that's one of the differentiators that's kind of fuels me as well.
Great answer. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, that was great, right? For me, it's simple. I think the world needs fanatical support. The world needs what we have. And I think that the need to simplify complex technical issues and problems that can ultimately lead to better business outcomes for customers. I think there's a massive and immense need for that. And I think that, to Travis's point, I think that we can provide that for our customers, in spades. I think that we do a phenomenal job of that. One of the things that I always think is interesting when I go and visit with customers, right? So like, let's take just a random example, like 300 person financial services type company, right? Their IT department is going to be a couple dozen people. And to Travis's point, like they might have some really, really great IT staff, but they can't do everything that the company wants to do to transform and to use technology to solve business problems. And then if you put yourself in the shoes of that like CIO or CTO who's trying to hire very specific, very high level talent into their business, man, it is a nightmare. It is so difficult for them to be able to go and attract that caliber of talent. And so they look to a trusted advisor, to a partner, to a provider like Rackspace to be able to fill those needs for them. That's why I say the world needs fanatical support. The world needs what Rackspace has, and I think that we can help accelerate customers' business solutions through technology with what we bring.
Yeah.
Great answers, both of you. When
I'm gonna double down on one if you don't mind.
Go for it.
All right. So when I joined Rackspace, I had built Red Hat clusters, right? I had built one Red Hat cluster for our systems, right? And we built it, and I never touched it again because it just stayed up. And then when I joined Rackspace, I became a Linux engineer, building 1 to 2 to 3 of those a day, right?
Yeah.
That was the Linux example where the amount of exposure and opportunity of doing really unique things and neat things was amplified at like a very intense level at Rackspace.
Yeah, the scale is insane.
Yeah, and now that's changed for me over time, right? Now instead of deploying Red Hat clusters, I am talking to all 3 hyperscalers on a daily basis about each of their emerging technologies, and I know how customers are using each of those platforms on a very, very real basis, right? There are very, very few worlds that operate in a true multi-cloud point of view, and the intensity of the exposure and point of view that I'm provided on my current role is really, really unique, I feel.
Great answers. So both of you had the opportunity in the earlier parts of your career to get to work with Lou Mormon, who was our first president, and he was very famous for saying and repeating that everyone has their last day at Rackspace at some point. So love that the fact that you're all bought in now. Don't for now, but glad that you are here and on the mission. Not saying that I don't know anything.
Jeff knows something we don't know, Josh.
I don't know, man.
We're choosing to be here now so that we all get to work together. It's really the very poorly delivered compliment that I was attempting to go with. So, or maybe something happens before we release this. Who knows where we'll all be? Anyway, thank you both for being on the program today. Super interesting conversation, and love hearing about your individual stories, your journeys, as well as advice that you've been giving out all along the way. So, thanks so much for that.
Thank you,
Thank you, Jeff. Always a pleasure.